So today I'm going to talk a bit about Gen AI in assessment, and I'm really going to focus this in 4 different areas. I'm going to start with just a general intro to Gen AI, and I really mean a technical intro to try to help you kind of demystify what is happening in a generative AI system and what that really means. And talk about 3 specific research study contexts that we've done: research on cheating in college assessments. 2 on the creation of valid assessment materials, and 3 in the use of personal development agents. And I'll get more detail about what each of those are in a minute. To start, it sounds like most people are quite familiar with ChatGPT at this point and other Gen AI kinds of systems. Just to make sure that we're all on the same page, I'm just going to very quickly take a book chapter that's associated with OpenStack's version of Introduction to Business, and say, generate me a study guide appropriate for a college level course. Just to give you a quick demonstration of what's possible, this uses a technology called retrieval augmented generation, where it actually takes the content of that PDF, makes that part of the prompt that's being used to feed what this is then being displaying, and then uses my instructions in order to generate content. Taking a look at ChatGPT lately, or any other generative AI systems and their sort of modern versions of them, as they change constantly, you'll notice that it's actually pretty good these days. Some folks, when they start in the Gen AI kind of space, you might have started around when ChatGPT was in the news a lot, around 2022, ancient history in Gen AI years. Might have found it only sort of kind of worked, sort of, and then kind of wrote it off. Things have changed quite a bit. Content has gotten a lot better, and the models have improved quite dramatically. I can also, in this context, I'm just going to pause it, say, generate me a test question, kind of thing that you might do. Even misspelled it, it won't have a problem with that. In case you were trying to generate content as an instructor of a college level course. And this is based not on its internal database, but is in fact based on the PDF that I just uploaded to it. You can do this with PowerPoint slides. You can do this with any sort of content that you might have. I'm also right now going to simulate what a student might do who doesn't really want to answer this question. I'm going to copy paste out of here into a temporary chat, meaning it doesn't have access to the PDF. And you can see what it will do is give the answer according to its internal database without any access to that information that I fed it to make the question in the first place. So it doesn't actually need access to specific copies or versions of whatever it's making information from. It can simulate human reasoning instead. I could also, as a student, say, I don't understand, and get more information about that content. Because it doesn't have access to the original PDF, it's going to give me background content from the original source data sets it is drawn from, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But yet, you can see it is a nice kind of self-development opportunity for a student, and an easy way to get essentially what is tutoring, what might have been previously unattainable due to cost or other kinds of restrictions. Random errors happen, we're going to ignore that. All right. So how is this possible? How does Gen AI work? All of this is based on a technology that you probably heard of, may or may not know a lot about, called machine learning. Machine learning is really an evolution of basic statistical methods, except in machine learning, we're generally prioritizing prediction over interpretation. So I don't know what our like quant-quali kind of mix is in here. Most people familiar with like OLS regression, kind of those kind of predictive models. So I find it really useful to think of the machine learning methods used in these kind of systems as an evolution of regression. Except instead of trying to understand individual parameters in a regression formula, we're instead trying to get really great prediction out of the overall model. When we use traditional OLS regression techniques, what we're usually prioritizing is really good parameter estimates. We want to know exactly why quantify this precise amount in the population that something has an effect on something else, broadly speaking. If we don't prioritize that, machine learning has a bunch of techniques where we can take what we might call non-optimal data sets and get really good out of sample prediction, but we totally sacrifice all of those parameter accuracies. So there's some really cool things you can do with that. You can, for example, take a 1,000 case data set with 30,000 variables and get a pretty good predictive model out the other side, which with traditional regression, we would not be able to do. So that prediction model is in fact what's happening in ChatGPT. It's more complicated than what I just described, but it is at its core a prediction model. The input is in fact all of the predictors in, it takes a data set that consists of the entire internet, basically the full sum total of all written human history, all of our books, all of our Reddit posts, everything on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, takes all of that and says, for all of the words that came before, what is the one next word that I would predict should happen in this bit of text? When we were just generating in ChatGPT, when I originally saw this, I thought this was like a cool human trait. Oh, it makes it seem like it's writing. It's not. These are individual prediction models executing one at a time in sequence. Literally thousands of individual models are being executed, each of which in ChatGPT's case have 220 billion parameters. And each of those 220 billion parameter models is run 8 times for 1.7 trillion total parameters to generate the predictions you are seeing one word at a time. That's why we have concerns about things like electricity usage, environmental concerns. It's not because regression is, electrically complicated. It's because we're doing it so many times over and over and over and over again. So that's the prediction that we're seeing. Artificial intelligence is a bit of a weasel word. It doesn't really mean anything in particular at this point. So I would recommend in general not paying a whole lot of attention to this term AI. AI really at its core means, can a computer do something that previously we thought only humans can do? It is a bit of a moving target. So the things that we would now think of as AI are things that we thought of as AI 20 years ago. Now we'd be like, that's an ordinary computer function. That's not AI anymore. So it's not really a consistent term. This, on the other hand, generative AI tends to mean, I think it's easiest to think of it in terms of these original machine learning models, except we're thinking about it in a sort of multivariate case. Instead of just doing one prediction, we're trying to predict an entire sequence of events that all have to make sense in relation to one another. For example, we would say that ChatGPT was a failure if, sure, the word is, logically, the word better might come after is given all of this, but if then it went off the rails and this content had nothing to do with this content, we would say it didn't work very well. So generative AI focuses on making all of these predictions interlinked in a way that we as humans appreciate, understand, interpret, and so on. So that's the generative leap. But it's still at its core is a series of prediction models. Now, an important aspect of these systems is that they are embedded in capitalism. And so that means that we have to think about the restrictions that are created by the kind of models we use and how they fit in the broader picture. When we look at large language models fitting, a 1.76 trillion parameter model is very expensive in terms of electricity, data center use, et cetera. So it is not something that the average person can do real easily. We instead rely on big organizations. It's been challenged a little bit in the last literal week by the Chinese product DeepSeek. But the traditional belief here was that for foundational large language models, you would need massive investments, a huge amount of resources in order to run them. These foundation models are things you probably have heard of, kind of. GPT-N is the foundation model used by OpenAI. That is different from ChatGPT. GPT-N is literally the prediction model, the thing making the predictions you are seeing. ChatGPT is an example of an API product. And what that means is it takes that prediction model and wraps some software around it. It also adds extra rules. So GPT-N doesn't work quite the same way as ChatGPT does. Because in ChatGPT, they know this is for a public audience. This is for people who could use it for not so nice things. So there's all sorts of extra rules ChatGPT has that GPT-N doesn't. So they say things like, if you ask about violent acts, we're going to try to discourage you from doing that. I'm not going to talk about certain controversial topics. And each company that releases an API product has their own agenda in setting what those rules are. And it can vary quite a bit. Google has Gemini, Anthropic has Claude. You also heard of Llama, DeepSeek is another of these. There's a massive range of these products now that we can use as foundation models. We can also license those foundation models and build products on top of them. I'm going to show you an example of that in a little bit. There are really 3 at this point major generations, I would say, in large language models. The sort of first generation approach pre-2020, when you had never heard of a large language model, was because they didn't really work super well. That was the key piece. If you as a human looked at it, you say, this is obviously not a real person. Think of the kind of the old interactions you might have had of chatbots on a website in like 2018. Like it was just clunky. It didn't work super well. Everything changed with the second generation models. And the main difference between these and those is actually data set size. They just kept adding more and more and more data. And somehow they started to act a lot more like humans. That's actually a big point of contention within the computer science community as to why that happened. They usually about beat Turing tests. If you don't know Turing tests, that's when you basically expose somebody to the output of one of these things and you ask them to determine, is it a human or is it an AI? And in most cases, according to current research, people actually prefer the AIs. They, one, can't tell the difference, but they like the AI interactions better in most cases. These are things like GPT-3.5, which is what was released when ChatGPT first came out. GPT-4o is the current version of the foundation model that runs underneath it. Claude 3, Grok 2, Llama 3, Gemini 1.5. Those are all current common models. What has changed in the last year is this third generation model. Now, third generation models are not really new models. They're actually more complicated versions of these. They use a technique called chain of thought reasoning. And what that really means is instead of you getting one output with your 1.76 trillion parameters, instead you feed large language models into each other behind the scenes where you can't see it. Instead, when you ask, hey, generate me a study guide, behind the scenes, it actually executes a different request that you never see the output for, and it kind of churns away for a little bit. The one that we've just recently heard of, DeepSeek R1, is an example of one of these. GPT-O1 and O3 are also versions of this. O3 is only pay available right now. You can get it for free. And there's no O2 because they were worried about a copyright or trademark conflict with the O2 channel in the UK or something. So that's why it skips one. But these are all the examples of the third generation model. Now, DeepSeek is really interesting because we can do this same sort of thing. Generate, let's say, a study guide. Oh, goodness. For business fundamentals in college. Sure. You're actually going to see the reasoning behind the scenes, which is right here. This is remarkably human sounding when you read it. I'll let it generate for just a second. You can see, oh, I need to think. Let me start with this. I remember from my own classes that this is all happening behind the scenes. So normally none of this output is shown to the user. If you use ChatGPT O1, this is happening, but they will not share this with you. They don't show this. So part of what's changed with DeepSeek is they're now actually revealing the reasoning of the model. But importantly, this is still a second generation model. It's just that multiple models run after another. So for example, it might generate this first bit of information, and then behind the scenes it says, do I need more information to continuing answer the question? And that will be a new prediction model. And then it will start executing that and getting more output. And the way they've engineered it behind the scenes is to ask questions in different patterns in order to get at what the user really wants. But it's still prediction. And that's really the most fundamental thing I want to make sure you come away with from here. These are prediction models. This model has no concept of business. It has no concepts at all. It does not really reason. It is just predicting output after output based on huge, massive prediction models. All right. So, or did that? So now let me get to the actual research that we've done on these different models and different things that we've tried to understand in the assessment context. I started in all of this with a very basic issue, a very basic question, which was when you give access to students something like this, what are they going to do? If they have this basic motivational problem in all of education and all of life, to be honest, how do I get the most meaningful rewards for myself or for those I care about for the least amount of effort? Sort of a basic motivational state that a lot of people find themselves in. A lot of students say, well, if I'm assigned an essay and I don't really care about the essay, why wouldn't I use this? What would be the downside? I think I should probably be able to do so. Students are also increasingly questioning if their own knowledge even matters in this context, with statements like, well, if I'm going to have access to this when I have a job, really, what's the point now? Because I'll have this forever. This is basically a calculator at this point. So if I have a calculator in the job, I don't need to know how to do derive equations and whatnot. I have tools for that. So if this is just a tool, why shouldn't I use the tool? So that situation is kind of the backdrop of the cheating interest. We also have a lot of research that cheating is super common in college. Roughly a 50 to 70% base rate of students cheating at least one time in one college course, and roughly 3 to 4% of students will be cheating in any given course on any given assignment, based on our current estimates. This seems to be a bit of it's slightly different in the large language model context, again, because a lot of students don't view using them as cheating. They view using them like a calculator. So the base rates seem to be a little higher. We have context here. There's not a lot of research on this yet, but one study looked at high school students. It was a fairly small sample, but found that 15% of them, when they were explicitly told, don't use ChatGPT, use ChatGPT anyway in that context. And those people are going to be coming into college soon too. Combine that with the fact that OpenAI has claimed that ChatGPT 4o, that's a second generation model, keep in mind, can achieve 99% accuracy on undergraduate knowledge. A claim they made. For graduate student knowledge, it's I think about 68, 69%, something like that. And I looked at that and said, there is no way. it just doesn't seem realistic to me that it can achieve that kind of accuracy level. But it is a big problem. So all this together led to me wanting to say, maybe we should check into this. So we did a research study. If you received an email about that and responded, thank you. But we basically surveyed the entirety of the Minnesota state system. It's 33 colleges, 2- and 4-year colleges throughout the state, as well as a random sample at the U, and asked them to send us an assignment. And then we're going to have an undergrad who knows absolutely nothing about your field of study complete that assignment, whether it's an exam or an essay or whatever. And then we're going to ask you to grade it. So when we did that, and sometimes these students, by the way, didn't even know what field they were doing. Like if you got an assignment from bioinformatics, and they're like, I don't even know what that is. And so they would still do this. So that was who we were targeting, completely zero knowledge of the domain. You can see that the ChatGPT average is 71 on those assignments. Now that's in comparison to the student averages in those classes, which was an 82. So basically ChatGPT alone, with no expertise whatsoever in the field, it looks like a bad but passing student. That's about where we end up. So that's actually a little better than I thought it would be, not nearly as good as OpenAI claims or the other companies doing these benchmarks. You can see the distribution. This is partial data. We're about to finish data collection now in the next few weeks, but you can see kind of the pattern. These are z-scores comparing the average student with the score that ChatGPT achieved. So in worst case, we have 6 SDs below the average student. Best case, we have 5.5 SDs above the average student. We try to figure out patterns here. Like, is there something consistent about the way that these exams have been written or these essay assignments have been written that causes ChatGPT to do well or do poorly? It doesn't really differ by discipline. We actually have the same disciplines represented on both sides of this pretty frequently. There is a slight advantage for multiple choice being a little bit harder to fake currently with GPT-4o than with essay or multiple choice assignments being more difficult than essay assignments. ChatGPT is really good at faking its way through an essay, especially at the undergrad level. But this part of the reason I gave you the background on 2nd and 3rd generation models is because this is also something that's actively changing. We did this with 4.0. We started this like a year ago, but because of the release of the 3rd generation models like DeepSeek, like 0.1, 0.3, those are explicitly for the purpose of being better at high level discourse about academic topics. So my suspicion is that anybody using that would do a little better than this now. But yeah, we haven't tested that. Now, some people, when they look at this, say, oh, I will just go everything in person. My solution to this problem is I will never do online assessment ever again. So what I will show you now is these guys. These is a pair of smart glasses. What these smart glasses have is a camera and a microphone. And what I can do is I can look at a piece of paper with a test, for example, and I can trigger these to execute a GPT-4o instruction by doing that. Done. And what it will do is actually display in an LED screen embedded in the right lens here, the answer to the question. The only way you can tell is that there are batteries on the ends. This is from Brilliant Labs called the Frame. This is just one example of quite literally hundreds of these products coming out. It is not something you can detect. It is not something, right now you would say, oh, now I can recognize these. This is a terrible fashion statement, I know. Right now you can recognize these if you know what they look like, but if you don't know what they look like, and there are, again, hundreds of these things coming out, you would never know. They're also, right now, you can tell, it's a little easier to see in this picture. There's, this is where the LED screen is. It's very small. It's in color, though. It will display enough text where you could copy essays. The way that when we've been testing it, we have it just show the A, B, C, D answer on the questions that you're looking at, which works perfectly fine. And right now it's an LED screen, so you can see it if you get up close, but there are also ones that are using bone conduction headphones. So it just actually broadcasts it into your temple. So you can actually hear the answers. It actually talks to you instead. So in-person does not escape you from this problem. That's only going to keep getting worse. These right now are $300. Smartphones or smart glasses are coming down more in the $200, $150 range, which makes them pretty achievable for anybody who cares that much about this. So don't think in-person saves you. My suggestion in this whole space is really to embrace the future. This idea that we face the future of work, and the future of work may be very AI dense, that's a better way of approaching this. Thinking of yourself as the last line of defense for your subject matter knowledge that you have hard earned over years of study, really bad starting point for all of this. That will put you on the defensive. That will put you in a position where you want to try to fight against it rather than find a way to figure out what this new future is together for your field, for your students, and for yourself. Take very seriously that the jobs of the next 5 years may be very different than the ones we have now. Especially 5 years is always a little kind of a weird timeline to predict, but within the next 10 to 15, certainly, I would say a lot will be extraordinarily different than it is now. I think the goal for us should be to remember that education is the purpose here. Like, we are not trying to catch students cheating. That's not actually the point. That is a tool that we use in service of trying to understand their learning. But the goal is to teach them. The goal is for them to learn. One of the things that students showed me when I basically created an assignment and said, hey, can you just show me how you're using this to study? This is an example in the paid version of ChatGPT of what you call a custom GPT. Basically allows you to set a standard system prompt and then create some kind of interaction for it. I have, in this case, taken that same open source PDF or open science PDF from OpenStax, the Intro to Business Fundamentals, that same chapter that I showed you before. And I basically gave it some instructions and said, hey, I want to have a quiz bot. And what I can do with this system, you can see right there, it's pulling in the PDF, is actually create an interactive quizzing system that helps me learn the material in a way that previously would require a private tutor or individual sessions with faculty and office hours, all sorts of not very scalable solutions. And now, essentially for free, every student can have access to their own personal tutor that's also very responsive. If I say, like, I'm not sure, it's probably gonna, it depends a little bit. Yep, gives me a hint based on the material that I've given it. If I tell it no, I still don't know what the answer is, it's gonna probably give me a point for it. Let's say C. That use of open language is also really important, or openly structured language. That was a guess, it worked out. I don't have to formally interact with it in any way that I'm not comfortable with. I don't have to engage with it in a particular kind of way. I just answer it the way that I naturally, whatever my personal preferences are, lead to. You can also customize it whatever way you want. In this version, for example, I've said, I really am made happy by emojis. And so it's using emojis everywhere as a way to kind of customize to my personal preferences. So this is the kind of thing that you can get to if you're open to it and really embrace this idea. All right, version 2. So we think about a lot about students potentially cheating. I was also interested in, well, what if people who kind of know what they're doing want to make their own jobs better? So if you, instead of wanting to rewrite assessment content every semester, every year, whatever your pattern is, instead of using content that's in textbooks, which is 100% now part of the database that all of these things feed from, and you want to make novel assessment materials, can you do it in a way that actually assesses the trait that you're trying to measure? Now, my interest in this context was actually, originally the study we've done is not quite in education. It has educational applications. Ours was in the context of job interviews. My question was, if I want to assess a trait of a job applicant, how can I do so using large language models in a way that actually creates high quality information that is shared by the job applicant? As in, if I'm trying, as in this study, to assess a person's competency at planning, how can you plan out your work? What is your capability in doing so? Then can I get ChatGPT to write a question that actually elicits information about the person's planning ability? That's the kind of path here. And I want to know, does it create bias? Does it create a high quality response? Does it even have anything to do with planning? I was also interested in the effects of a particular moderator we know about in the space, which is the way these interview questions are written. Generally, there are two typical categories of interview questions. We have behavioral questions where you ask about, tell me about a time that you did a thing related to planning. And then you have situational questions where you basically craft a scenario in which you believe someone would engage in the thing that you're trying to measure. So you say, well, let's say you are at you're in your workplace and there's a big project coming up. How are you going to prepare for that? And the goal is to elicit them to respond in a way consistent with planning. They might not, though. You probably experienced this yourself if you've used open-ended test questions, even if you're nowhere near this space. Sometimes a student just goes way off the rails and you look at it and you're like, I mean, you're not wrong, but that's not at all what I wanted you to do. So that situation happens a lot in job interviews. So writing good questions is all about targeting in on exactly what you want to know about. So we did a 3-phase study in this case. My goal here was to actually create a system that would write high quality interview questions, not just go to ChatGPT and say, hey, write me a question, but instead to actually make a system that a novice, like any random manager, could go in and write a high quality situational interview question without having any expertise in writing those questions. To do that, we had to do 3 things. One was we engaged in this first sort of generic platform engineering stage, where we explored all of the various commercially available systems at the time. We used GPT-4 with ChatGPT, ChatSonic, Perplexity, Notion, and Bing, which are the big ones at the time. It's about a year ago now. And just saw which one works the best as a starting point. We then, in step 2, took that one, which ended up being GPT-4, and used ChatGPT to refine a system prompt that produced consistently questions that we liked as experts, subject matter experts in this domain, to say, is this in the right ballpark of what we want in terms of question generation? We also partnered with a company called SHL. That's an organizational consulting firm. They do a lot of hiring work. They had a definition of planning that they had that's basically available on their website. This is what they assess. They have their own questions written by IO psychology PhDs in a very traditional kind of almost Delphi format in order to generate high quality planning questions. And then we went to complete novices, but novice managers, hopefully. We went to Prolific. We looked at people who were basically frontline supervisors. A lot of, if you've ever done prolific research in this area before, there's a lot of like call center managers and that kind of group. We asked them to generate questions. We split this by behavioral and situational questions. So we asked, we basically ended up with 12 questions written by our SHL experts, IO PhDs. We had 12 questions written by ChatGPT based on the prompts that we had constructed in the first study. And then we had 12 questions written by people, by managers with no prior experience writing questions. So the ultimate question to ask in this study then was, is ChatGPT more like a novice or an expert? And so these are ratings of the percentage of responses that were relevant to the planning competency. So we had our subject matter expert team, again, came in. We asked a bunch of Prolific people, 250 people on Prolific, to respond to these interview questions. They didn't know what condition they were in. It was just a question they had to respond to. And then we rated them for blind to condition, whether that was relevant to planning or not. Would this question help me understand this person's planning? And you can see that in the behavioral questions, which are this like salmon color, I guess, right here, about the same. Behavioral questions are actually easier to write. And I gave you the prototype for it before. Tell me about a time when. But when we asked about situational questions, which is about crafting a realistic scenario that a person would really face in a workplace and try to get them to speak about planning. But you can't say that, because if you say that in the question, tell me about how good you are at planning in this situation, then they know what to target. It's not their natural ability kind of coming out. They're instead going to bias their own answer. So when we asked our novices to do that, only 25% of those responses were relevant to planning. ChatGPT, every single one. And for us, for our SHL group, we're about 88, 89%. So these not really distinguishable. The key here then, it looks like for certain kinds of problems, novices, or for certain kinds of generation problems, novices do just fine because those problems may be just easier, simpler to generate content that works in that situation. But in other contexts, there may be complexity, hidden expertise that is perhaps not immediately evident that ChatGPT can effectively simulate if primed to do so, just as well as an expert can. This can then be turned into a product. That's what the ChatGPT piece can do, right? So this could be, I'm not going to do it, but this could be converted into here is a great resource for managers. You don't need to know anything about writing good questions, about how to hire people, but we're going to write a good question for you so that you can get some good information about it, and here's some guidelines on how to score it. Or if we really wanted to go that far, we could do the same thing for scoring the questions, the answers generated by these models. So this is a common kind of product development path now that we're seeing, where this is an example of what could be an API product that I was mentioning before, where somebody takes a baseline foundation model and builds a system on top of it and uses that to bring AI capabilities to a situation to improve outcomes. All right, so that was 2. This is 3. This is our biggest project. On personal development, this one's specifically leadership development. We have a open grant we started in July, project with the Office of Naval Research. So the Office of Naval Research was really interested in a challenge that they were seeing at the US Naval Academy in Annapolis. So in the US Naval Academy, they get a lot of leadership content in classes. So if you don't know the Naval Academy, it's basically college. It's just college for officers, people who want to become naval officers. So they were having some issues with what we call transfer. So they would sit in class, they would get a lot of content about leadership, and then they finish the class, and there's kind of a breakdown between what they learned in class and then actually putting that into action in their real behavior. The Naval Academy is also organized in a really interesting way. There's a leadership structure among all of the students. They call it the Brigade of Midshipmen. The brigade is divided into platoons into squads. There's also a cross relationship called fire teams. And all of these different leadership structures are intended to give them real practice, everyday experiences with leadership to put what they're learning in class into action. And it's hard. It's difficult. Being a leader is a hard thing. So one of the things that the Naval Academy has done to try to help with that is leadership coaching. So what they do is there's a bunch of companies that certify people in coaching, like International Coaching Federation, ICF, and they basically provide guidelines and rules and training about how to engage in leadership coaching, which is a very open-ended practice where you basically help people identify their goals and their challenges and work through this process of figuring out how to grow as a person. It's very different than something like counseling or therapy. That's always about like solving specific problems or dealing with specific issues the person is facing in their life. Coaching is about growth. So you're trying to say, how can I achieve my goals more effectively from where I am now to where I want to be? So they use this coaching program. Now, coaching is, as you might suspect, very expensive. You have to have trained coaches. It's all one-on-one. People have to find time to go travel to a person's office. I see where I'm going here. All of these kind of resource expenditures meant that coaching is actually in use at the Naval Academy by like 6 or 7% of the student population. In part because it's just hard to use, in part because they just don't have enough coaches and it's very expensive. So the Naval Academy came to me, or the Office of Naval Research came to me and said, is there a way we can just do this with AI? Can we make a scalable coaching solution with AI? And they were actually pretty good about it. They didn't say we want to necessarily replace our coaches, where an augmentation solution would be happy, or maybe the easy problems can be solved by the AI coach, and then we move them to the human coaches when they're bigger problems, whatever. And that was just such a cool opportunity. I definitely took this opportunity. So we wanted to build, can we actually make a leadership coach? Can it be fully autonomous? Can we get the kind of outcomes that we would get associated with a human coach? Do we need the augmentation? Does augmentation help? Just endless questions, endless research questions for me, but endless practical questions for the Naval Academy as to how this would really work. Now, this is not exactly ChatGPT. This is not exactly a large language model. It is an API product, but it is more toward what we would call agentic AI. You might have heard a little of this in the news lately because OpenAI came out with an agent version, or what they call an agent version of their platform. What an agent is at its most core is a system that has autonomy to act. So the version you've seen with ChatGPT actually has autonomy to take control of your computer, if you've ever tried it. What it will do is actually say, hey, I would like to book a Delta flight, and it will use your computer to log into Delta, book the flight for you, it will click on things. That's the agent aspect. In our case, we don't want that kind of interaction. We want the agent to actually lead the person through a scenario, through a coaching session, to actually judge whether they're doing well in it and they're getting the good kind of information out of it, to judge whether they're having a good experience and they may change course if it's not, and then to actually set up the normal outcomes of coaching, which means basically creating a summary that says, here's what your goals are before our next session. Here are the challenges you're going to face along the way. Here are the opportunities you're going to have to make that work better. And here's a specific work plan that we've agreed on as being productive toward you reaching your goals, called the GROW model. So we want the coach to do all of that. That's very different than the way you interact with ChatGPT, right? So if you interact with ChatGPT, you expect it to answer your questions. You expect it to do the things that you tell it to do. We explicitly do not want it to do that. Good coaching is about encouraging metacognition, meaning we want to help the person think about their own problems and solve their own problems. We don't want to give them answers. We might want to give them hints, maybe point them in the right direction, but we don't want to actually say, here's what you should do. So we explicitly had to make a platform based on a large language model that does not do what the user asks in certain situations. That was the challenge. So this is what it will eventually look like. And I show you this because this is not what it will actually look like in a minute. We're working on a prototype version. This is our front end. We have a separate front end and back end development team. So we do the back end stuff. The IO psychologists are doing the AI development. I'm gonna point that out because it's very important. In a lot of these AI projects, especially the ones that you hear about publicly, there are often not a lot of people with actual subject matter expertise in the domain of the product being made. It is instead computer scientists and programmers kind of guessing as to what it is it's supposed to be. It doesn't have to be. We are actually generating the AI itself because AI generation like this is mostly just prompt writing. It's about writing a prompt, testing it, seeing if it actually gives you the outcomes that you want, fiddling with it, fixing it, iterating over it in order to make it better, trying it again, then trying it with users, et cetera. It's basic, repetitive, quantitative, and qualitative research. So we're doing all of that part. We actually have a comp sci person advising us on like, hey, have you considered this approach that you've never heard of before? But we're actually doing the writing itself. So this platform, I will give you a demo of. I'm going to hit refresh just in case. We're developing two versions of this right now. One is for the Navy, for the Academy. The other is actually for college or student leaders of student organizations here at the U. So we're kind of co-developing these two paths. I'm going to give it, I don't know. I'm not going to give it a lot to work with. We'll see what it does. There's a lot of danger in live demos, so we'll see what happens here. So yeah, so you can kind of see the approach that's already being taken. Sounds like you're feeling uncertain. Maybe share a little bit more about what you're interested in, whether it's your role in the student group. So you can see it already picks up on that information because this is the population we've customized it for, even though this person never said, hey, I'm a student or anything. This is all information we primed it with. I guess I'm having a problem with attendance. This is actually one of the most common issues that our student leaders and our focus groups have come up with. They said people just don't show up. Sometimes I have co-leaders or vice presidents, all sorts of people that just don't do what they're supposed to do, just people not actually following through. That's the most common issue we've come up with. And you can see what it's doing is it's never giving a straight answer. It's actually engaging in a common coaching pattern, which is one, kind of affirm what the person said to you. Two, retranslate to make sure you understand what they're talking about. And three, push them a little further with this sort of metacognitive prompt. And it will repeat more or less that strategy with almost anything that I throw at it until it determines that we have enough information for the grow model. So it will actually progress piece by piece. First, what's the goal? What's the problem? What are you trying to do? Two, why is that going to be hard? Or is it going to be hard? Let's walk through that. Then what can you do to make it more effective? And then how do we translate all of that into a specific plan of action? And then it will present that summary. The platform will also, after the sessions happen 2 weeks apart, the session after a week will text message the person and say, hey, we talked about this in our session. How is that progress going? And have a conversation that way and maintain accountability between sessions. So this is what agentic AI can do. This kind of level of interaction with appropriate subject matter expertise behind it. I think that's really, if you ever have the opportunity to work in a project like this, really push, because your expertise is not something that the people making these AI things have, right? This is what we can do because we understand coaching, we have knowledge of leadership theories, coaching models, et cetera, and we bring all of that to bear in how this works in a way that a pure technical team just cannot do. So that's kind of the power of this approach. All right, we have time for a bonus. I have a bonus for you. Hopefully this will play over the speakers. Let's find out.
Let me offer a thank you to all of you at the Carlson School for listening to my talk. Or what I really mean is the talk of my creator. You see, I'm a digital twin, a copy of Dr. Richard Landers with his voice and some of his mannerisms, but able to say things that he cannot say. For example, I can speak Japanese and Russian. 今、私はカルソンスクールに日本語で話しかけています。実はあまり難しくありません。Я действительно могу говорить на любом языке, на котором вы хотите. Все это делается с помощью искусственного интеллекта. And remember this. As for this portrayal of Dr. Landers, it is the worst it will ever be. Generative AI technology will only improve from here. What we can do today is already impressive. What will it be able to do next year? I guess we'll find out together. Good luck.
So I created that with a literal script. I wrote words and it made that. That's where we are right now. And again, that point that what you just saw is the worst Gen AI will ever be is a very important one. Everything that I've just showed you will only be better from here. At the same time, the development process, the specific steps taken, the way that subject matter expertise plays into this, that still will vary. There will still be bad products, but the fundamental technology is only going to improve. How far it will go, I don't know. I can't tell you that. Whether we'll get to real true human level intelligence. There's a lot of people in the CS community saying we're already there, which is clearly a lie. There is a lot of talk about whether we'll surpass human intelligence. Do we even have the ability to judge whether AI is better than us? Aren't we so inferior to AI already that we can't even answer that question? Those are legitimate conversations happening in the CS community right now. I think bringing in the expertise in humans, how things really play out, that's why it's so critical for us to stay engaged. Key takeaways I will leave you with. Again, one, Gen AI is already fully capable of cheating, fooling, creating, or helping people. It's only going to continue to increase realism, complexity, and value. That is neutral. This is a tool. It is a very complicated tool, but it is nevertheless a tool. I like to compare this to the introduction of the internet. If you were around in that time period, you might remember, people thought it was not real. It was just like, oh, it's that fake thing. Kids do it. It's kind of a toy. No one really cares. I remember the very first time that I saw on a billboard a website URL. I was like, oh my God, like this is the virtual world come real. I didn't think that would ever happen. And yet now it is an everyday aspect of our lives. So don't think of Gen AI as 3D TVs, a thing that we're getting pushed and I get kind of flash in the panty kind of approach. Think of it like the internet. It is foundational and it will just keep changing from here. Two, that human oversight is not always a necessary safeguard. We created a system that makes those interview questions quite effectively. We've tested it in a bunch of different conditions and different competencies also, and it works pretty well across almost all of them. But that's because we put that expertise in to make it. I'm also very confident in the coach for the same reason, but not all products have that behind them. So when you're thinking about what systems to use for class, for yourself, for whatever, the same problem exists. You have no real way to determine whether the homework was done behind the scenes. This last bit I think is super important. Personal experimentation is super easy. Again, Synthesia, that digital twin, I literally wrote a script. It took less than 5 minutes. In ChatGPT or DeepSeek, you can just open it and play with it. It's only by doing that kind of thing that you're going to be able to stay even remotely on top of this, because it is moving incredibly quickly. And it doesn't even take that much of an investment. I mean, literally set aside, I think actually Ethan Malik in his co-intelligence book talked about this, set aside like half an hour a week and just play with all the current AI free stuff and just see what it does and what it can do for you. And think critically about how you might integrate it and where it would be dangerous to integrate it into your life, your teaching, your work. And it's only by doing that we avoid this. Don't let AI happen to you. It should be a tool. It should be something you take advantage of. Make sure you treat it that way.